Hi guys, and welcome back to another solved true crime case. I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to be talking about a case that has been on my mind ever since I filmed the Velvet-Eyed Assassin video, which I will link somewhere around here if you haven't seen it. But today I'm going to tell you all about the real-life Bluebeard, which is a famous French serial killer from the early 20th century. Bluebeard is the character from a French fairy tale written by Charles Perrault, who has also written Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, amongst other very famous stories. And those stories have inspired the German versions published over 100 years later by the Brothers Grimm, by the Grimm brothers. And Bluebeard isn't as famous as Cinderella, mostly because it's the tale of a wealthy man who murders his beautiful wives, and I'm not quite sure how Disney would market that to children, but the tale became notorious enough that Bluebeard is in the dictionary and is a word that stands for a man who marries and kills one wife after another. Unfortunately, it can also be used as a verb to describe the crime. The reason this case is named the real-life Bluebeard is because at the beginning of the 20th century in France, Henri Désiré Landru's crimes rivaled the ones committed by the fairy tale's protagonist. Just before I get started on this video, just a reminder to please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. It means a lot to me, and I do true crime weekly, as often as I can. So if you're into that, please keep watching. If you're not really into true crime, there's a little bit of art and hamster content on my channel as well. So with that being said, let's just get started. Henri Désiré Landru was born on April 12th, 1869 in Paris and grew up on the Île de la Cité, which is a tiny island in Paris where you can also find the Notre Dame Cathedral. And he had an older sister who was 15 years his elder, and overall it is said that Henri had a very happy and pleasant upbringing. He was quite charming, he did pretty well in school, he was particularly good in math and drawing, and as a teenager he got involved with his church as an altar boy. He seemed to be so involved that his parents considered making him join the order or become a priest. However, in high school, Henri decided he wanted to become an architect. He did not succeed at becoming an architect, so in 1989 he became an architect assistant at the Bisson Allôme Le Coeur firm. He's only 20 years old, but he lands his first job the same year he meets Marie-Catherine Rémy, and she still lives at home with her mother, but they both fall in love and they start dating. And I feel like it's important to add a little detail that Marie-Catherine Rémy is actually Henri's cousin. For some reason that was appropriate back then. But in 1890, he leaves her for his mandatory 3-year military service. And in 1881, months after his departure, Marie-Catherine gives birth to their first daughter, Marie-Henriette. He returns in 1893 and marries Marie-Catherine in October of that year. Between 1891 and 1900, the couple goes on to have 3 more kids, Maurice Alexandre, Suzanne, and Charles. And they also end up moving quite a lot. They moved to quite a few different places, and after his military service, Henri felt quite unstable, and he would change jobs very frequently. He became an accountant, he was a salesman, at some point he was a cartographer, a joiner, a plumber, he did it all. And by the time the couple has their 4th and last child, Henri finds himself in a really bad financial situation. He can't seem to keep a job, and the 4 children turn out to be quite expensive. Out of desperation, very likely, he decides to set up a scam to make some quick cash. And he declares himself a civil engineer and invents a fake bicycle that runs on petrol. So like a very rudimentary motorcycle, and he just invents this bicycle that doesn't exist and launches a national campaign to advertise the bike and states that any order must come with 1/3 of the final price in order to lock the order in. And it sounds an awful lot like a Kickstarter, though the people who end up ordering this bicycle believe that the bike already exists, that the deposit is just to guarantee the building of it, because in the 1900s they weren't really mass producing anything. Of course there is no bike, and Henri quickly disappears with all of the money sent by all the scammed customers. And this scam is so successful that he decides to keep this vibe going. He cooks up multiple scams under various aliases and often gets caught and fined. He gets jailed quite often. He got 2 years in 1904 and 13 months in 1906, and he even stated that society does nothing to help the creative spirit of honest people. And then these same people are surprised to see you embark on suspicious business practices where innovation is much better rewarded. So he quickly decided that it was much more lucrative to be creative by scamming people than to make an honest living. During his 13-month jail sentence in 1906, he attempts suicide and gets let out of prison early. Psychiatrists evaluated him and declared him to be in a diseased state of mind, and that although he isn't crazy, he also isn't in a normal state of mind, whatever that means. That was their diagnosis back then, so he definitely wasn't insane. He just didn't operate like the average person. In 1909, he decides to place an ad in a local newspaper under the name of Claude Morel. Although he is still married to Marie-Catherine, the mother of his 4 children, Claude Morel states he is a man looking to get married, and Jeanne Iseré responds to this ad, and they start sending each other letters before meeting up and going on dates. They spend some time together, he proposes, and once she is set to become his wife, he tells her that he needs some of the money she's been saving up in order to establish a marriage contract with a solicitor. Obviously, as soon as he gets his hands on the money, he flees, and Jeanne tells police all about the scam. They arrest Henri, or Claude, as soon as he tries to use Jeanne's securities, because of course she didn't give him cold hard cash. She was giving him securities that he could maybe trade in at a bank. I should know more about this. I've actually worked in a bank, but whatever it was very traceable, and as soon as he tried using them, it flagged up, and he got fined 100 francs and sentenced to 3 years in prison. While serving his 3-year sentence, his mother passes away in 1910, and his father commits suicide 2 years later. As soon as he gets out of prison, he goes for one more scam, and this time he decides to swindle 2 men by buying a garage from one of them and selling it to the other man before actually having paid for the garage in the first place. So he basically sold an unpaid good, and the 2 men quickly informed the police about this scam. Although police knew Henri Landru was behind this, they never arrested him because he just took off. He still got sentenced to 4 years in prison in absentia, meaning he was absent during the sentencing. However, the law was quite interesting back then because he had already relapsed 3 times, meaning he would now have to be deported for life to the penitentiary in Guyana. He must have known how extreme the conditions were in French Guyana and that the mortality rate was very high, which is why he disappeared. He could no longer afford to get caught, and he also had no intention of making an honest living. So instead of giving up his somewhat lucrative scams, he decided to just no longer let his victims live. Around 1914-1915, as the First World War is ravaging Europe, Henri Landru decides to use multiple aliases and portray himself as a lonely widower looking for vulnerable and lonely women with very little family or friends. The reason he targets widows, vulnerable, or isolated women is because it won't get a lot of attention when they go missing, and their friends and family aren't likely to notice their disappearance right away. In February 1915, Jeanne Cuchet and her 17-year-old son go missing. Unfortunately, Jeanne and her son were quite isolated. They didn't have a large family, and nobody really seemed to notice their disappearance. At that time, Henri Landru was living in Vernouillet and was still married to his first wife, though they were separated. He would often drop by to visit and would always bring gifts. His wife and children thought he was working as a brocanteur, which is essentially someone who sells junk and random items at a flea market. He would just buy stuff and flip it or just sell it again. And they thought that's where he got the gifts from. As you can already imagine, the items he would give his family were actually stolen from his victims, and he never worked as a brocanteur. In Vernouillet, he goes on to murder another 2 women after seducing them and gaining their trust long enough to get his hands on their money. In August 1915, he gets stopped in a train because his ticket was expired. He was using an expired ticket, it was no longer valid. The train conductor asks him for his ID, which is obviously a fake ID, but he panics and realizes that his home address in Vernouillet is written on that fake ID. And he doesn't want to risk going back to that house in case police decide to check it out. So he decides to just bail, and he finds himself a lovely isolated villa in Gambais. The Villa Trique is ideal for Henri because the closest neighbors live about 300 meters away, meaning he would be isolated enough to murder any future victims without anyone noticing. He continues searching for victims through newspaper ads, still portraying himself as a widower and still using different aliases. He's very charming, he's very good at getting the women's attention, and he selects his victims very carefully. He keeps a little notebook where he would write down any information he found relevant to help him find the perfect target. He was quite specific with what he was looking for, and he's also very cautious because he cannot afford to be arrested again. So when one of the victims asked him for his ID, he pretended to not have them anymore because he came from a region occupied by Germany. And since it's the middle of World War I, there's no way to verify he's telling the truth. It's possible that he could be coming from a region occupied by Germany and threw away his paperwork or had his paperwork confiscated and fled. And no one would be able to check that, and it wasn't that crazy of an excuse back then. It was an actual thing. So he would always make sure that he had a backstory or a reason for not really providing his ID. Between 1915 and 1919, Henri Désiré Landru is believed to have murdered 11 people: Jeanne Cuchet and her son André Cuchet, Thérèse Labordeline, Marie-Angélique Guillen, Berthe Anna Héon, Anna Colomb, Andréane Bablet, Célestine Buisson, Louise-Joséphine Jaume, Anne-Marie Pascal, and Marie-Thérèse Marchadier, as well as her 3 dogs. Over the course of his life, it is believed he has used over 90 aliases. We still don't know how he killed his victims. All we know is that he would target these women, bring them back to his house, and they would never be seen again. It's possible that he dismembered them, burned the most recognizable parts, such as the hands, the face, the feet, and would either bury or dump the rest of the bodies into the nearby lake. His neighbors did complain about the horrendous smell coming from his chimney, as well as the very black smoke it produced, but nobody ever suspected him of a single crime, so nothing came of it. Towards the end of 1918, while Henri pursues his life of crime, the mayor of Gambais receives a letter from a woman asking for an update on her good friend Mademoiselle Anne Colomb, engaged to a Monsieur Dupont, which is, Dupont is the equivalent of Smith in terms of last names, so there's about 15 million Dupont in France probably. And this man and his engaged fiancé were residing in Gambais. She hadn't heard from her friend in a while, and she was hoping the mayor would help her get back in touch with them. Unfortunately, the mayor doesn't know anyone by the name of Dupont, so he can't help her, so he kind of lets that one slide. And a few months later, he receives another letter. This time, it's from a different woman, Mademoiselle Lacoste, asking him for news about her sister, Célestine Buisson, who is allegedly living in Gambais with a Monsieur Frémier. Again, the mayor doesn't know anyone by the name of Frémier, and he finds both letters quite odd. He informs both women of the similarities of their letters and gets them to contact each other to share their stories. The families of Célestine Buisson and Anne Colomb quickly realize that Monsieur Dupont and Monsieur Frémier are the same person, Henri Landru. Of course, they still don't know that it's Henri Landru, but they understand that this is likely the same man behind both relationships. Both women had responded to a similar ad in different newspapers, and they both went missing after moving with the man to Gambais. Their families get together to file a complaint against X, which in France, I'm not sure if this is international, but I know in France, filing a complaint against X means that you're filing a complaint against someone whose identity is unknown, but the case still goes forward. And an investigation is launched, but for a while, police get absolutely nowhere, mostly because Henri has used so many aliases that it has successfully muddled his steps. Luckily, on April 8th, 1919, the neighbor of Mademoiselle Lacoste recognizes Henri Landru coming out of a tableware store that sold fancy dishes and plates and silverware, and he had a female companion on his arm, and the neighbor who saw him come out of the store was just so sure that he was the same man who was seeing Célestine Buisson. However, it wasn't Célestine around his arm, so she decides to tell police about this, and luckily he was very easy to track down because he had just placed an order at the fancy dish tableware shop, and they needed his address to deliver his order. So the store clerk gave police the address, as well as the alias Henry was using. And on April 12th, 1919, on his 50th birthday, Henri Landru is finally arrested at his home address in Paris. Inside his home, police find some paperwork stating his real name, Henri Désiré Landru, as well as a little black notebook that contains a list of 11 names, including the names of the 2 women who had recently gone missing. Once he's arrested, his face is on all of the newspapers and stories start pouring in. Within days, police find out about the villas he had in Vernouillet and Gambet, as well as the storage units and garages he was renting around Paris to store the possessions of the women he had murdered. Unfortunately for Henri, he had kept extensive notes and archives of his operation, and police quickly discovered that he had been in touch with over 280 women because of his matrimonial ads in the newspapers. Of course, most of them weren't victims because he selected them very carefully, so they never got to that stage. Most of the women he met through these ads were not isolated, vulnerable, or rich enough for him, so they got dismissed. As awful as that sounds, they don't realize how lucky they were. He gets charged with murder on April 14th, 1919. His homes and villas get searched from top to bottom, and they discover human remains, ashes, bits and pieces of women's clothing, such as buttons, pins, staples, pieces of corsets, as well as 47 human teeth. They gathered over 4 kilos of charred bones belonging to 3 different heads, 5 feet, and 6 hands. It turns out that Henri Landru would murder his victims and then go to their homes to move all of the furniture and their belongings out to store them in garages or storage units. He would often get the help of his son, who thought his dad was working in a flea market and that they were just moving stuff his dad had purchased to resell. So his son had no reason to believe that the furniture they were moving belonged to one of his dad's victims. Henri's notebook also revealed some of his purchases. He bought quite a few wood and metal saws, lots of coal. You could even see dates and times next to the victims' names, suggesting the time and day he murdered them. And a very troubling detail police found was that whenever Henri would purchase train tickets for his victims, he would always get a round trip for himself and a one-way ticket for his victims, because he already knew they wouldn't be going anywhere once he got them to his villa. Throughout his many interrogations, Henri Landru kept pleading his innocence and also did try to plead insanity by talking to psychiatrists, but he was unsuccessful. The trial begins on November 7th, 1921, and attracts some high-profile celebrities in the court. Henri Landru is represented by Vincent de Moreau-Giaferi. If you remember, he's the lawyer who defended Eugene Wiedemann, the Velvet-Eyed Assassin, from my previous video in 1929, and the whole trial turned into a show. People would come from all over to witness Henri Landru's personality and charisma. And as with more modern and more famous serial killers such as Ted Bundy, Henri Désiré Landru was very, very charming and very, very charismatic. He knew his crowd, and although you might not find him attractive, or you might not understand why Ted Bundy was praised for his looks, for example, these people are very charming in person, and back then the whole beard and pointy mustache was actually quite a look. He had this very distinct style, and people overall they seemed to want to like him, although a completely different side note, but I feel like he reminds me of the guy from Home Alone, the neighbor. He has that same stare. It's not a fair comparison, but that's the first thing I thought of when I saw pictures of him online. But just to be clear, I'm not complimenting him and I'm not trying to praise him whatsoever, but unfortunately for the victims, Henri Landru became famous for his funny phrases, and people attending the trial ended up loving the way he made a mockery of the court, kind of like the kid in the back of the class cracking jokes in school. Some of his famously funny quotes were, "You keep talking about my head, Your Honor. I regret not having more than one to offer you." Me, making somebody disappear. Well, if you believe whatever the newspapers say. And then, "If the women I've known have something to say against me, then they should just file a complaint." One time, the crowd was laughing so hard that the judge threatened to send everybody home if they didn't stop laughing, to which Henri responded, "Don't mind if I do." Yeah. He's clearly not taking any of it seriously, and he probably believes that if he keeps charming the audience, he will get away with murder. Because there's actually very little physical evidence tying him to these murders. Henri's lawyer was just as dramatic and announced to the court that they had located all of the victims Henri is being accused of having murdered, and that they would be walking through the court doors any minute. Of course, everyone in the court turned their heads, and after a few minutes, the lawyer said that every single person who had turned their heads towards the door didn't actually believe Henri was guilty, since they so easily believed the women could still be alive. The judge didn't waste any time in pointing out the fact that Henri didn't turn his head towards the door, because he knows they're dead. As with Eugene Wiedemann, Vincent de Moreau-Giaferi isn't good enough to spare Henri the death penalty, and on November 30th, 1921, Henri Désiré Landru is declared guilty of 11 murders and will be getting the death penalty by guillotine. On February 25th, 1922, Henri is woken up at 5:30 in the morning, and on his way to the guillotine, a priest asks him if he believes in God, most likely to help save his soul before his imminent death. Henri responds, "Father, I'm about to die, and you're playing guessing games with me." He did request to wash his feet prior to his execution, but it was denied because they feared he would attempt suicide, which is ironic because I guess they wanted him dead, but not on his own terms. He was gonna die of the death penalty, not of his own volition. He did get offered one last glass of rum and a cigarette, but he refused, stating, "It's not good for your health." Just prior to his execution, his lawyer asked him if he would finally admit to having murdered these women, but all he said was, "That is my own little baggage." He got executed at 6:10 by Anatole Desbleurs, a famous French executioner, and he was buried in the Godard Cemetery of Versailles in the section dedicated to those who have been executed. You can still visit this cemetery to this day, but none of the tombs are marked, most likely on purpose. What really bothers me is that between 1919 and 1922, Henri received over 4,000 fan letters and 800 marriage proposals, which means a few thousand people needed to get their heads checked back then, because this just confirms that hybristophilia is nothing new and will likely always exist. But I keep thinking about the trial and how the crowd kept laughing at this guy's jokes. And the victim's family members were present. Like, how sick is it to go through a trial trying to get justice for your daughter or your sister, and the crowd just thinks the guy is like a catch. It must have been awful to be the victim's family at that trial. But Fernande Segret, who was married to Henri Landru at the time of his arrest, the same lady who was around his arm when he got recognized by a neighbor, told court he had tried to poison her twice. After the trial, she became a showgirl in a French cabaret before leaving for Lebanon to become a teacher. In 1963, a movie came out about Henri Landru, and she got a 10,000 franc compensation from the producer because she felt her character in that movie had been misrepresented, and it was defamation. On January 21st, 1968, she committed suicide, and it is said that in her bedroom were only two pictures, one of her mother and one of Henri Landru. His name and his story is used all the time in songs, movies, comics, TV shows, books, even in the French version of Theme Hospital. I used to play that game all the time when I was younger, but apparently in the French version of the game, you can hear the receptionist on the megaphone say, "Monsieur Landru et Petiot, veuillez vous rendre à la sortie," meaning Mr. Landru and Mr. Petiot, who was another French serial killer, "please proceed to the exit." I thought that was... I definitely didn't know that until looking up this case, but that's how well known he is in France. As far as I know, this is the only Bluebeard type serial killer in France. The one who resembles the tale the most, luckily. I hope there aren't any others. But just to give you an idea of just how influential he was in culture, there were a few movies made about him. But I just thought this was a very interesting case, even though it's 100 years ago. He was I guess the Ted Bundy of the 1900s, of like the early 1900s. As bad as that, you know, that's not a good thing, but even back then people were crazy about serial killers. Some women were just crazy for him. Anyway, that's it for today's video, guys. I hope you found it interesting. Please let me know if you have any cases you'd like me to cover. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in next week's video. Bye.